Yo, how's it going everybody? It's Sketch and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode we're taking a look at the PlayStation port of Cyber-Sled, developed and published by Namco, releasing to the arcade in March of 1993 and would receive a port to the Sony PlayStation in 1995. This arena vehicle combat game is a single or multiplayer title where defeating your opponent and destroying their hover tank is the only objective. The arcade cabinet was definitely a sight back in the day and has almost a Running Man vibe to it, which even back then caught my attention. Though it is rare to see a working arcade version, the PS1 port is going to have to do for now. What's the story of Cyber-Sled though? Well, it goes a bit like this. In the year 2067, a violent new sport has taken the world by storm with astounding popularity known as the tank duels. These one-on-one death matches satisfy not only massive crowds, but also the competitors themselves who are all in it for the same reason: waste the competition and collect the prizes once it's all over. That's really it. Cyber-Sled isn't wasting much time with story development, but it's got action dialed in heavy. Gameplay wise, you can pick from 11 characters, 5 of which you unlock after the first clear. Only the final boss character is off limits, but the rest offer up plenty of varied strengths, speeds, and personalities. The basics pilots all have unique traits with each craft, and for the most part they're all fairly balanced. The unlockable crafts are a bit more specialized and also pretty sick with the designs, even though the fashion over function can come with some drawbacks, some minor, some major. Your hover tanks will cycle through 8 arenas where the goal is to simply destroy your opponent by machine gun, laser, or guided missile. The craft variety comes into play here considering if your tank is fast, its shield is probably weak, and if it dump trucks damage, it's probably slow moving. Going with a more well-rounded character might be the wave to start, but hey, whatever works, right? There's heavy ammo pickups and additional shields on the board, and that's it besides you and your foe. The arcade version had 2 analog joysticks for control, which translated to using the directional pad and shoulder buttons on the PlayStation. Getting the slide strafing and being able to move while turning corners while keeping sight of your opponents is the main key to success here. Figuring out the enemy's movements and trying to load up on as much ammo as possible will also help out tremendously. You can switch between first or third person perspective in battle, and can also switch between the original arcade mode visuals or enhanced graphics via the game's realistic mode. Cyber-Sled also features a split screen mode which you and a bud can battle in first person with the original style graphics. The first few opponents on the single player mode start out with some fairly easy patterns and attacks, though once you get into the more shielded and faster enemies on the latter half of the game, you'll notice you can get smoked pretty quick. Cyber-Sled also requires a 1 coin clear, otherwise it's right back to the title screen. That's right, Cyber-Sled has no continues or difficulty settings, so with this one just expect to get bodied at some point before getting it clear. Once you defeat the final boss, you unlock the additional boss characters and hover tanks. Graphics wise, Cyber-Sled runs on the Namco System 21 hardware, which titles like Starblade and Air Combat were also programmed with. This board in particular was designed with 3D polygon processing in mind. Cyber-Sled runs in a full 3D arena with some light texture mapping in the PlayStation version, which can be switched on or off depending on the graphical mode chosen. Character models are all pretty varied with some lighter, faster designs as well as hulking behemoths. Animations overall are pretty solid here too. For example, crafts with mechanical legs slink around as you move your tank. Likewise, wheels will pivot as you move in each direction. Some models do actually hover but don't have much in the way of noticeable animations like flares or pulses. Projectiles range from infinite Vulcan rounds, lasers, and missiles. The lasers look similar to the ones seen in Starblade a few years prior, which makes sense considering they're both programmed on the same hardware. Graphical impacts of shots and eventual explosion of each craft also seem a little dialed back compared to the arcade version. The damage animations seem to be missing some frames compared to the original. In the arcade version, more things would fly apart like vehicle parts or destructible items in the environment, which to an extent here are missing on the PlayStation version. Arenas vary with day and night cycles, along with some areas having more or less cover. Initially I thought each character had their own unique stages, but they loop after stage 8. The arcade version does fare a bit better in the visual department, but the PS1 version isn't too bad, even though it sort of pales in comparison. As far as the arcade to home conversion, all things considered, it's decent, though there are a couple of Namco titles that fare a bit better on the system, like Ridge Racer and Tekken. In between each bout, the main 6 pilots have unique win and loss screens depending on the outcome of each match. The win quotes can be pretty funny at times, but what's even funnier than that are the win quotes for the unlockable characters. They don't have any win quotes programmed in, but they do proclaim to press any button. Victory screens usually have your characters on top of huge stacks of cash and gold too. Unique to the PlayStation version, each character has their own pre-rendered introduction video showing their vehicle approaching the arena to battle you, visually giving you a preview of what you're up against. These parts look closer to the arcade version, but once you boot into each match, you might notice the difference in graphical fidelity, which again, considering it's an early PS1 title, is not too shocking, just a rather noticeable jump. Sound-wise, it's again pretty decent here with some raucous sound effects. Gunfire and explosions are hefty, and there's a fair bit of voiceover with the arena's announcer. The soundtrack here also isn't too shabby either, even though it's not some of Namco's most memorable compositions. The sound effects here are also so not bad, but not the most amazing either. It all relatively falls in the middle here, while not being the best, but far from the worst you'll hear on the PlayStation. On the whole, Cyber-Sled is a pretty fun arena combat game. While the port isn't quite as good as the arcade version, there's still a good time to be had here. Even though in some departments it's lacking a little bit, overall it comes together to be rather decent. Cyber-Sled did get an arcade sequel, Cyber Commando, in 1994, but that never received a home port, and Sega would later debut the Virtual On series in the following year, 1996, to arcades, which had a similar aesthetic to Cyber-Sled, but then added verticality to the mix, allowing crafts to be airborne during combat. The Cyber-Sled port honestly isn't bad, but seeing what Namco titles that came before and after its release could leave a little bit to be desired by players. Cyber-Sled gets a 7 out of 10 and comes recommended to fans of arena shooters and vehicle combat games. This version does have some interesting elements to it, but does have some things scaled back compared to its arcade counterpart. It's a good one to run every so often if you got memories of seeing the machines in arcades back when it released and want to replay it, but once you unlock the additional characters and get a few clears, high score and speed runs may be all there is left to go for here. Though if you're into games like this, the Virtual On series has a similar vibe and is a bit more fast paced. You can't really go wrong with either here, but mileage may vary. And I thank you again for checking out this video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. But until then, take it easy, stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.